Hey everybody, welcome out to another episode of Windshield Time at Mountainlands Supply. I'm Joey. I'm here as always with Brandon, our CEO.
Hey everybody.
Spencer Shorts. You can say hello.
What is up?
And that's enough out of you. Today,
Be quiet.
Today we're going to be talking about expansion of Mountainland. We get a lot of questions, especially from people who have been here a while. You know, why even expand? You know, when I started here, we only had 4 stores between Mountain States and Mountainland. And it was, it was great. Life was good. But then as we started to expand, you started having all these questions as, you know, why expand when everything's going great? Why deplete our resources when everything's just fine? Why go into an area that we can already service with trucks, you know, that sort of thing. So it raises a lot of questions as to why we expand in the first place. And then maybe we'll touch a little bit on, you know, the method that we've used to expand. So why don't you give them a little Cliff Notes version of why would you expand a company, Brandon?
That's a great question. I don't feel like my answer is different every time, but I feel like there's, you know, a foundation here. Like there is some...
Yeah. There's foundational principles.
Yeah, and there's some, you know, reason to the madness of why we do things,
Yep.
how we do it. And I think, you know, it's maybe important to understand, too, that even for me personally, when I first started, I remember we were talking about expanding, opening up new stores, and I think one of the very first ones was Spanish Fork.
Mm-hmm.
I remember going through that on the finance side and analysis, and I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like, why would we ever want to do this? And
You're only 15 miles from our other store.
Exactly. And we're just going to cannibalize a lot of our sales out of Orem.
Because shifting money from your right pocket to your left pocket doesn't make any sense.
And incurring more costs, expense.
Yep.
And so I just remember being really reluctant and kind of hesitant to it, that we should go down there.
Yep.
And then we did do it. And now you look at this, I mean, it's a full-fledged branch that we have that, you know, it stands on its own 2 feet.
Employs like 18 people.
Exactly. And I think what's really important for me is in that very first year, I remember just looking at the numbers and thinking to myself, okay, I'm definitely going to be seeing a drop in Orem. I'm
waiting.
Just waiting to, you know, to make my point.
So hard with this one.
Yeah, to prove my point to them, like, I knew it. You guys didn't know what you're doing. And it was actually opposite. Both of them grew.
Yep.
And then we were actually profitable down there. And so I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. So, you know, everybody needs to know I was there. I was in that boat as well of why are we doing this? This doesn't make sense. And I think at the time, you know, before we were 100% employee owned, it was a little bit different. We were just it was to provide more service to our customers, make it easier for them to come in, especially the will call stuff that we're trying to capture, which is usually a little bit
better margin.
Yep. A little bit more profitable for us. So we wanted to have that. That was kind of the initial reason why we were expanding. But as we became an ESOP, really for me, it's kind of morphed into, as I've thought about it more and more, there's kind of 2 principles that I look at. First of all, we have this ESOP that we're in charge of, that we all participate in our company in. And this ESOP, do we want it to stay stagnant?
Yep. Do
we want it to stay status quo? And I think if I pulled all of our 1,000 employees, I think what they would say is no. I think we would get like 95% that would probably say, no, I don't want this to stay stagnant. I want this
we need you to add value to it.
Exactly. We want you to grow this and increase that value for us. So for me, you know, I've internalized that and saying that's probably the biggest driving force for me is, hey, we're trying to create that value for that ESOP for everybody's retirement. That when we do retire, that we are going to be able to have an increase because it's an investment that we have.
Absolutely.
And we don't want our investment to just stay status quo. Yep. We want it to continue to grow.
Yep.
And now that shifts into the next point of why, well, in this type of an industry, in this market that we're in, how are you going to increase that value?
Got to grow.
You got to grow. Because right now, an early principle, so some people, I don't know if I've shared this on this, but my background, I grew up in a family that my parents actually owned their own business. It was a very small business. It was an automotive repair business. So my dad, you know, was a mechanic and stuff like that. And anyways, just salt of the earth kind of people, but that very small business. And I remember it was my dad or my mom, they kind of said this principle, taught me this principle that, hey, if you're staying the same, you're dying, you're regressing.
There is no stagnation. It's either growth or decay.
Exactly.
You're growing or dying.
Progressing or digressing or regressing.
Yep.
So there's no staygressing.
Ooh,
right?
That's a Brannonism. I like that.
So you either got to be moving forward, and basically the principle is if I'm staying the same, if I'm not doing anything, everybody else around me is continuing to grow.
Yeah.
And so therefore I'm losing. I'm moving backwards. And so to just stay with the game, to stay up there, you got to continue to grow.
Yep.
And so with that, you look at our economy, or not our economy, but our marketplace, our industry. Holy cow, everybody's growing, and there's a lot of consolidation right now. Mm-hmm. The bigger players are getting even bigger.
Yeah.
And so if you want to stay relevant in this industry, you got to grow. Yeah. You have to grow. So that's kind of that other driving principle of, well, why do we keep doing this? Well, that's the reason why. And we've been very fortunate in the past few years, especially through COVID, since we became an ESOP. Look at Idaho. Well, there are some changes up there that happened within our industry with other people. I wouldn't say competitors. There's actually friendlies for
just
us.
Other independent wholesalers.
Yeah, they sold out. And it kind of
national.
It creates a little bit of a vacuum there.
Yep.
And so it's, okay, well, what do? We have an opportunity to do. Are we going to seize it? Or are we just going to sit on the sidelines and watch what happens up there and let someone else take it? And we've been a little bit, I don't want to say aggressive, but we've been proactive.
Right.
We've tried to take advantage of those situations. And so as you've seen us kind of greenfield or make acquisitions, it's really they're strategic. We're looking for things. There's one other thing that I would say too. Why do we continue to grow? And that's to diversify.
Yep.
There's a big audit accounting principle. It's called concentration risk. And concentration risk is being concentrated in one thing too much, so that if that one thing failed or there was a change in that one thing, then it could upset your business. So Mountainland went through this years ago with a concentration risk in customers.
Yep.
It was Geneva Pipe.
Yep.
Geneva Steel, whatever.
Geneva Steel.
Not Geneva Pipe, Geneva Steel. My bad. But Geneva Steel
was 80%.
Yep. So if Geneva Steel went out of business,
which they did,
that could be drastic for our company. But leadership before that time realized that, even without having the accounting principles, they realized that because they were smart men. Mm-hmm. And they said, hey, we got to diversify. So we got to change it so that we have more customers. And so how do we do that? Well, we get into different verticals and we start selling different products. So that's one way. There's another thing too, is geographical concentration risk. And so us just being on the Wasatch Front, well, what happens if there's a major earthquake?
Yeah, natural disaster,
anything
or an
like that.
Economic disaster.
Exactly. So we have to be conscious about that. So the expansion going into different territories, that also alleviates some of that concentration risk. If you ask me as of today, is there still concentration risk here on the Wasatch Front? Definitely.
Yep.
And so that's why you see us striving to move off of the Wasatch Front and not decrease our revenue, because we don't want to do that. We just want to increase revenue somewhere else, so that if there was a natural disaster here on the Wasatch Front, man, the company would still be able to continue to grow or to continue to go forward.
Yeah. As a state, Utah State, we're still over 80% of our revenue comes from Utah State.
Yeah.
So that's why you see us, looking outside the state of Utah, because what if something happened in Utah? Economic things can happen just with legislation in a certain state.
Good point.
We've looked at that. The other thing that I heard this principle a long time ago, and it could have changed by now. So if you're fact checking me out there, good for you. Way to go. You know how to Google. But a class I was in one time said that 12% of your customers turn over every year. Now that's either they change ownership, or they go out of business, or they just change their buying habits. But 12% of your customers change every year. And so you have to gain 12% of your customers every year. You have to change what you're doing and get 12% more customers every year just to hedge against that. And so that's
stay even.
Just to stay even.
Yeah.
So if you want to grow that, you need to grow even higher and, grow your share with the business you have with the current customer base, and then go and acquire new business. And so that's another reason why we've had to expand, because there's a concentration in Utah of distributors in our same territory.
Yeah.
You know, so there's in any one of our verticals, there's up to 6 or 7 other competitors in our major territories. And that includes some of them in Idaho, you know. So when you have that many distributors all going for the same piece of pie, it makes it really tough.
Yeah.
And that's when margins erode. That's when profitability goes down. And so to go and find new territories where you can not be an O&D distributor, you can set yourself apart from other distributors. That's where you can make some money and then add the value to the ESOP.
Yep.
So there's a lot that goes into the methodology of why we want to expand. But I think it's important that people understand that we're doing it for real reasons and not just because we want, there's no hubris here. It's not like, oh, we want to get bigger just so we can be bigger.
Exactly.
It's we need to get bigger so that we can kind of fight against those who are bigger than us.
Exactly. And I would go back to the number one priority is to grow the value of the ESOP.
Yeah.
That's the main point in my mind. That's why we do what we do. All these other things are very important and they also contribute to why we do what we do, but really it's to grow that value for the ESOP.
Yeah.
I want that ESOP to be a huge number for everyone.
Yeah.
So when it's going to be life changing when you get that distribution out of your ESOP. That's going to help you be able to attain those goals that you have in retirement. That you're going to be able to, help the next generation in your family. I mean, that they'll have a better leg up in the world than you did. I mean, that's the real reason why we're doing this. It's for all of us. It's for every single one of you and your families. That's why we continue to grow and why we come to work every day.
Well, and with scale comes a lot of other things like systemization. We have to have systems that are you can repeat them.
Yeah.
In different areas. So when you see us systemize certain things, there's a reason for that too. And it's not because we love to become corporate. I hope that we still maintain a
if anything, I fear that.
we try and fight against that every single day. But there are certain things you have to systemize because you have to be able to scale out, because you can't continue to add a bunch of bodies as you build out. You have to consolidate, make sure that you're doing it the right way so that, again, you can add value to that ESOP, because that is what we think about every single day, is adding value to the ESOP. And if we're not doing it, then we don't make that decision.
Yeah. And I would, I remember having a conversation with Brent Anderson a long time ago, and it was about that. It's like, man, let's get our own house in order first before we start trying to bring on more complication to it. And that's what, shout out to Brent and everybody else that helped him.
Yeah.
But they set the tone. They set the stage for us to be able to continue to grow and to expand. Because 10 years ago when I first came on, we couldn't have expanded the way that we're doing right now. We just didn't have the systems in places, the processes.
Yep.
We didn't even know what we were trying to just wrangle everything else in that we were dealing with just in our own house.
Yeah.
And Brent did a phenomenal job of just kind of setting that stage, getting things cleaned up, and setting a tone of change.
Yeah. Embracing it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of been fun to see over the past few years, because it was like pulling teeth to get people to even consider change.
Yeah.
And now I think we're on the other extreme of where it's like, why aren't we changing enough? Or right now, like, we're not doing it fast enough. We should have 2 acquisitions and we should be opening up 6 stores. And it's like, whoa, time out. Slow down. So now I feel like we've gone to the extreme on the other side, but I just want to be in the middle here of doing it. And we got to be really careful when we expand. We know that. What's been interesting is over the past few years, when we first started to expand, opening up a new store, I wouldn't say it could have brought the company down, but it could hurt the company really bad.
For sure.
Now we're getting to the point that, hey, if we go and we open up a store and say it fails, and we haven't had one that's failed yet, but if it does fail, it's not going to bring the company down.
Right.
It would hurt, but it's not going to be...
You can absorb a few blows.
Exactly. We've gotten to that size now that we can go ahead and do that. So it's been really interesting, kind of our methodology. See this nice little shift that I'm doing for you, Joe. I'm doing your job, just basically. Anyways, no. But that methodology, really, before we had to be really, really picky. And I mean, it was run the calculation 20 million times to make sure, okay, is this what it's going to be? Is this what it's going to be? And we made some really good choices, but we were really picky. Over the last 5 years, we've done about 5 acquisitions.
Mm-hmm.
We've expanded to a half a dozen places, things of that nature. People need to realize, of the 5 acquisitions that we've done, Bruce and I have probably looked at over 50 different companies.
Yeah.
And, I've heard people say, wow, you guys are super aggressive. Actually, in the acquisition world, we're ultra conservative because we're very picky. And there's 2 things that we're looking at. Is the finance side. Does it make sense financially for our ESOP? Is it going to add value? That's the biggest thing for me is day one, is it going to add value to my ESOP? Because I don't want it to drain on my value.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is the cultural aspect. So there's the quantitative and the qualitative side that you're looking at. That are they going to fit in? Do they have the same mindset as us? EOS, having that conversation with them.
Yeah.
Hey, how do you feel about EOS? Would you embrace EOS? Things of that nature. It's just huge. So as we shift into the methodology, those are 2 big things that we really look at. And both of those boxes have to be checked for me to say, you know what, this is a good deal. We're going to go forward with this. We've had ones where the culture is awesome. Financially, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I had one in particular, and I use this one as an example. Phenomenal financially. Culture was horrible.
Yeah.
I met with the guy for like an hour and a half, and I walked away from that guy like, no.
Yeah.
If there's you guys have heard me talk about tone at the top. Basically, the people at the top set the tone for the whole company. If he's like that, then that means his whole company's like that. I was like, it's going to be a distraction for us. We're going to have to fire everybody and bring in our own people, and we just don't have the time or the resources for that. So
yeah, if we wanted to get a stinker company, we could have had 40 other acquisitions.
Yep.
And that's kind of an M&A company. If you're a private equity firm, if you're just going out and buying companies, we would have found several to buy because either they were kind of retreating on their ability to make profit. So then you can go in and you can slash their operations and you can make it profitable pretty quickly, but that doesn't do anything for your culture.
Yeah.
And so we choose not to do that because number one, it is a distraction and it takes a lot of resources to do that. But number 2, that kills your culture.
Yep.
And it takes a lot to build the culture that we have. So we're just not willing to do that.
As an executive team, we learned that we were pretty young. I'm fairly new together as an executive team. We had an incident that came across that I don't want to say we were going after the money, but there were red flags that it was going to be a cultural killer.
Yeah.
And we recognized it, I think, fairly quick. And we we reacted to that. We made some choices to be able to correct that fairly quick. And we kind of made a blood pact after that we're not going to do that again. We're not going to sacrifice the culture for money.
Ever.
Because we've worked too dang hard for this culture that we're not going to screw it up because of, $1 million or
Right.
$10 million or $100 million. It's not worth it.
No.
I'd rather preserve my culture all day long over that. So, but you're right. If we wanted to make acquisitions, we could make them all day long,
Right.
all day long. And that's the other thing. Like some companies go out and make acquisitions because they look for companies that are, they're struggling.
Right.
And they're like, oh man, I'm going to get a good buy for it. And then we can turn this around, and then it's going to be, and we don't look for those companies. We want kind of a turnkey. We want someone that's has good processes. They're doing the right thing, that they're going to come into our culture fairly easy.
Yeah.
Things of that nature. We're not looking for a turnaround company because that just, honestly, it scares me.
Yeah.
Because I do believe in our processes. I believe in our people that we could do it. It's just a distraction. And you never know, because that's I feel like we're going to pick up a rock and there's going to be a ticking time bomb underneath that. And it's just going to explode in our faces. So,
well, the other thing is anytime you add a company, you're adding people who are now shareholders and fellow owners in this company. You're adding them. And I mean, we kind of see it as our duty to try and only add people who are worthy of being part of this cool thing we got going on. So we're not going to disrespect the people who are owners in this company by knowingly adding people that we know should not be here.
Well, it's just like on the financial side, when we do an acquisition, we want it to add value to the ESOP financially. Just when we do an acquisition, the people coming over, we want them to add value to our culture.
Yeah, culturally, they need to add value.
We don't want it to detract from it.
Yeah.
So
cool. Well, so hopefully that kind of answers a few questions you guys may have had about why we expand, the way that we do
more
it,
questions,
or create more. And if you have more questions, feel free to send them up the chain. Let us know. We're always happy to talk about any topic on here and let you guys have a bit of a peek behind the curtains. So, with that, we'll say goodbye for today and enjoy the ride, guys. Thanks for spending a little bit of windshield time with us.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, see you guys.